It was 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was rushing to my van, late for a $3,000 job that could save my sinking electrical business, when I slammed face first into something I didn't expect. A 6-foot privacy fence, built overnight, that now surrounded my entire property. It wasn't just a fence. It was a prison, built by Delilah Thornfield, our HOA president, the kind of woman who has more rules than common sense and thinks she can control everyone's lives with a clipboard and a ruler. She claimed that some made-up 1970s easement violation gave her the authority to trap me on my own land. I'm not talking about a neighbor dispute here. Folks, I'm talking about being literally imprisoned on the land my grandmother left me. You can imagine how that felt. And to make it worse, I had security cameras that caught Delilah in the act. There she was, her hired crew working under floodlights like they were burying a body, cutting fresh cedar and pouring concrete on my property like it was theirs. The morning air smelled like fresh lumber and wet concrete, mixing with the dreams of me paying rent this month. And that's when I realized this wasn't just some petty land dispute. This was a full-blown attack on my future. But here's the twist. Delilah had no idea that I had something that would turn this illegal fence into the most expensive mistake of her life. But let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. 6 months ago, I was Garrett Mills, a 45-year-old electrician, drowning in a messy divorce in Denver. My ex got the house, the dog, and half of my business. I got the lawyer bills and a crash course in starting over at middle age. Then my grandmother passed away and left me her 1940s craftsman home in Willowbrook Estates, Colorado, a small 3-bedroom home on a quarter-acre lot. The kind of property they just don't make anymore. My plan was simple. Renovate it as a memorial to the woman who raised me, flip it for enough money to rebuild my electrical business, and find some peace in the Rocky Mountain foothills. What I didn't know was that I had just moved into the personal kingdom of Delilah Thornfield. Willowbrook Estates wasn't some sleepy neighborhood. It was suburban battleground ruled by Delilah, the HOA president. She had been running Willowbrook for years, turning it into her own little dictatorship. This woman measures grass with a ruler and hands out fines for mailboxes that don't match the exact shade of red she deems acceptable. She's got more Ring cameras than a security company, and she's also a real estate agent. That's right. She looks at every property as an opportunity to make a commission, especially my grandmother's. Now, let me give you some context. The HOA in Willowbrook was formed in 1995 when developers divided the surrounding farmland into quarter-acre lots. Property values shot up after the Denver tech boom pushed families into suburbs. My grandmother's house, though, was different. It was one of the original homes, built 50 years before the HOA was even a thing, and technically exempt from a lot of their rules. But none of that mattered to Delilah. She saw my property as prime real estate for luxury development. I first met her one week after I moved in. She showed up on my driveway, heels clicking across the gravel like she was marching to war, perfume hitting me like a chemical bomb. "I'm Delilah Thornfield," she announced, clipboard in hand like she was wielding a sword. "We have compliance issues to discuss." She handed me a certified letter detailing violations about a garden shed my grandmother had built back in 1963. Apparently, it didn't meet current setback codes, something that's been grandfathered in for decades. The fine? $2,000. Plus she demanded I tear it down immediately. I laughed. "Ma'am, that shed's been standing since Kennedy was president. It's more historical than anything you've got in that clipboard." She didn't laugh. "Rules are rules," she said, like a robot. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about a shed. It was about power and land. Delilah had been showing my property to developers for months, calling it a prime development opportunity. She was setting me up to sell one violation at a time. 2 weeks later, I discovered my electrician van was gone. Towed. At 6 a.m. on the dot. I didn't call the tow truck driver. But when I did, he told me it was under a brand new HOA rule that didn't exist 12 hours before. Delilah had called an emergency HOA meeting the night before at 9 p.m., no less. Only 4 people showed up, including her, and voted to ban commercial vehicles from residential driveways. The towing notice was time-stamped for 5:47 a.m. The rule took effect at 6 a.m. Now, I don't know if Delilah had a crystal ball or she just knows the world revolves around her, but she sure knew when my van was going to be towed. When I called the impound lot, the guy was laughing. "Thornfield Recovery Services," he said. "That'll be $480, cash only." Guess who owned the company? Delilah, of course. I started documenting everything, security cameras running 24/7, and it paid off. The next week, I caught her on film photographing my van at 11 p.m. with professional surveillance gear, then making calls from her BMW at 5:30 a.m. while the tow truck was waiting around the corner. This was no accident. This was a planned military operation. But here's where I struck back. HOA rules can't be applied retroactively, and Delilah had violated due process. A phone call to a lawyer, and I had the ground for a federal civil rights lawsuit. I posted the footage on our neighborhood Facebook group. The response? It went viral. Neighbors I never met before started reaching out. Mrs. Chin messaged me first. She'd been fined $1,200 for a bird feeder that had been hanging for 8 years. People were getting scammed, and I had the proof. Delilah didn't stop there, though. She escalated the harassment. A building inspector showed up at my door, claiming there were safety issues with my electrical work. He was there with Delilah, taking notes like she was his boss. The inspector left, empty-handed, but Delilah didn't care. She stepped closer, smiled, and said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." That's when I realized this wasn't about building codes or property values. This was about control, money, and a scam that she'd been running on homeowners like me for years. And I was just the next target in her line of fire. The harassment intensified. I filed complaints with the state, posted security footage, and reached out to other victims. Then I found something delicious. Delilah's own property had violated half the rules she so lovingly enforced. Her fountain was too loud. Her pool house had no architectural approval, and her BMW regularly blocked sidewalks during her inspections. I wasn't the only one getting scammed. I contacted contractors she had used and offered free electrical inspections. Turns out 5 families had been overcharged for emergency repairs by companies that paid Delilah referral fees. That's when she really went off the rails. The building inspector came back to check my electrical work, but this time he couldn't find a thing. Delilah stepped forward, as smug as ever, and hissed, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I realized that all of this wasn't about property values or even about the rules. It was about power, money, and a way to force vulnerable homeowners into selling their properties so Delilah could make a profit. But here's the kicker. I was about to make her regret every single move she made. And the fight? It was just getting started. I'm going to leave it here for now. Drop a comment and tell me your thoughts. Have you ever had a neighbor like Delilah? You know, the kind who thinks they own your life? Or maybe you've experienced something like this with an HOA. Let me know, because trust me, you're not alone. And if you've been through anything similar, there's a lot of power in speaking up. Let's stand together.